listeners, to the Mindful Living, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of awareness, healing, and connection. Well, I'm your host, Sana, as always, and today we are diving into a deeply fascinating and often misunderstood topic: how somatic mindfulness and intentional psychedelic medicine can help us achieve greater mental health, less stress, and more inner peace. And joining me today is Leslie Draffin, a women's somatic coach, psychedelic microdosing guide, breath and meditation teacher, and menstrual cycle educator. Now, let me share a bit about Leslie with all of you listeners. She has dedicated her life to helping midlife women embrace their bodies, their sexuality, and even plant medicines as a path to healing. And her journey is powerful. After spending years in therapy and struggling with anxiety, binge drinking, and self worth issues, she discovered the healing power of psilocybin mushrooms. And through microdosing and somatic practices, she not only found sobriety, but also created the cyclical microdosing method, a groundbreaking protocol designed to help women heal hormonal imbalances, trauma, and reconnect with their bodies. And today we'll be exploring how sacred earth medicine, somatic awareness, and intentional psychedelic uh, can be used to unlock profound healing, especially when traditional methods have really fallen short. So let's quickly get started. Leslie, welcome to the show, and it's an absolute honor having you with us.
Well, Sana, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to chat about all of these amazing things.
Of course, of course. Well, before we start, Leslie, let's talk about your healing journey. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. Um, Highs and lows. It started with uh, quite a lows, and then years in therapy, and then struggling with anxiety, and now you are into that healing journey, and now you are sharing that gift with all, especially the women out there. So uh, how what exactly was, your journey like, and what led you to make such a life altering shift?
Yeah, so I really spent most of my life deeply disconnected from my body and numbing out, punishing myself through things like alcohol abuse, through things like eating disorders,
Mhm.
because unknowingly I had this really deep wound around unworthiness and feeling like I didn't deserve love. And for
Mhm.
me, that really became even worse because at 18, I had sex for the first time and then was diagnosed with herpes. And I'm from a very religious family. My father is a minister, a pastor. So that threw me into a deep shame spiral. And that made the eating disorder worse. It made the alcohol use worse. And it made me pretty addicted to being a perfectionist, being a hustler, being an overachiever because I was trying to prove to everyone how worthy I was. And so, like you said, I went to therapy, I was on different medications. I did this Western medical route to try and reconnect to my body, and to
Mhm.
heal the anxiety that I was experiencing because I was so disconnected. And for me, nothing really clicked until I expanded my awareness through spiritual and mindfulness modalities like breath work, like meditation, and finally eating tiny doses of magic mushrooms. That really seemed to be, the up level that I needed to help me start to put the pieces together and notice this worthiness wound I'd had since I was born, notice
Mhm.
how I was medicating to disconnect from this body that didn't feel safe, didn't feel worthy. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, it really put me on the path to leave my journalism career and find a new way of helping women become aware and awakened in the world by, questioning things about their life, questioning things about their own belief systems so they can move out of these blocks, these states of stuckness that are keeping them from the life they really want.
Yeah, yeah, quite a journey, Leslie, and thank you so much for openly sharing this because uh, I think most of us, we do make mistakes in our teenage or early that phase of young in our youth, um, and I think the most important thing is understanding our self-worth and identity. And when we do come from a strict background, I think it really becomes difficult to have a self identity, an identity of ours. So yeah, definitely, I mean, sometimes we kind of mistakes are the stepping stones to discover, unearth that identity and self-worth of ours. Instead of seeking for external validations, uh, you embrace on a path to get everything inside out. So that's really quite of a journey, Leslie. Okay, so let's move on to understanding about all these modalities. So um, to start with, a generic question, but of course very important. Somatic mindfulness, in fact, I am also new to this. So, for all of us, Leslie, if you can, what exactly is it and why is it such a crucial component to healing?
Yeah. So I think what a lot of people get wrong about mindfulness is thinking that it only has to do with the mind and clearing the mind and opening the mind and getting these things quote unquote out of the mind that might be challenging you, like anxiety and depression. But in
Mhm.
truth, those experiences start in the body through sensation. And so, somatic mindfulness is this practice of learning to touch back in with the body, listen to your body's whispers, understand the language of your soma, which means whole organism, whole body, and notice and get really curious about what sensations are showing you and the stories that they are then telling you. So, for me, this has really been about learning to trust the body, and when I can be in the body, naturally, I'm out of my head. So you can do this through a bunch of different modalities. Breath work, I think, is the big one that a lot of people are leaning on right now. It's simple. You can do it anywhere. It's safe for everybody. And you can learn it for free online. I think breathwork is such an amazing tool. And then I think the other thing that's really important and impactful is just looking at the body with a curious lens, getting really curious about what comes up for you when you feel anxious. Where are you feeling that in the body? And if you are feeling low confidence, where does that happen in the body? So that's kind of a general explanation of what somatic mindfulness is to me.
Mm, that's interesting. Interesting. So it's like as you mentioned, that a lot of people think healing happens only in the mind, through talking or maybe thinking our way through problems. But this approach focuses on the entire body. I think it's, being mindful of the sensations of how my breath is happening, at what frequency. Maybe I'm breathing short, but maybe I'm inhaling quickly, but I'm exhaling slowly, and then how the sensation is there from my heart and then to my legs and then to my feet. I think it's something like that.
Yes, absolutely. And the other really key part here is learning to understand your nervous system and beginning to form a relationship with your body that is one of partnership. I think a lot of people, especially women across the world, really grow up hating their body and what in a lot of different. It manifests in a lot of ways. Maybe you didn't have an eating disorder, but maybe you have negative self talk whenever you look in the mirror, or maybe someone bullied you about what you looked like, and so little by little, these betrayals disconnect us from this relationship with ourself, which is, to be truthful, the longest and most important relationship we'll ever have is with our body and with ourself. And so when we can start to get curious about the way that our body is reacting, like you said, what's my breath doing? Am I breathing into the chest? Okay, maybe that's a sign that my nervous system is activated and I'm feeling a little bit stressed out. Maybe I'm feeling the need to, get away. Maybe my breath is easily maybe it's easy for me to exhale, but it's harder to inhale. Or maybe it's harder for me to fully exhale and get all the air out. So the nervous system, through the breath and through paying attention to the breath, can be another really amazing entry point into connecting to the body and connecting to somatic mindfulness. So, nervous system um, regulation, I guess, might be one of the words you would want to use, but overall, I think just partnership with it and an overall curiosity.
Hmm. Makes sense. Makes sense. Also, now moving on to psychedelic medicine, I think it's becoming more and more accepted, but still there are a lot of misconceptions around it.
Yeah.
But can you explain how intentional psychedelic use, particularly microdosing works for mental health and trauma healing?
Yeah, for sure. So, what I work with is psychedelic mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms, like you mentioned. And I work with these in tiny, tiny doses, such a small dose that you are not high, you aren't hallucinating, and you often don't feel very different than your normal day to day life. And so, these magical little tools do is they help rebuild the mind body connection because they allow us that curiosity. They allow us oftentimes the space to pause, and so the way that they're working in the brain is that they're impacting certain serotonin receptors that are really densely located in a part of the brain called the default mode. And this default mode network is where our deeply held beliefs are, our sense of self. A lot of us really kind of think this is like where our unconscious mind lives. And so, as children, this place is very open, very fluid, very permeable because we're learning and we're growing and we're changing as children. And as we age, the default mode network becomes very rigid. And so, if you've lived your life disconnected from the body, suffering from anxiety, suffering from low confidence, from bad self talk, those habits can live there in your default mode and almost become a part of your unconscious mind. And so, with psilocybin, it helps to thaw out that very rigid space in the body, in the brain, and turn on other areas in the brain so that new neuroplasticity can happen, new neural pathways can become connected, and it can strengthen the neural pathways. And so no longer do you always go to your default mode of talking badly about yourself in the mirror. When you are ingesting psychedelics intentionally, and maybe that intention is to love yourself more, not only is the psilocybin working in your unconscious to help soften some of the places in the brain where it's just your status quo to think badly about yourself, but with somatic practices added in, like breath work, like movement, like massage, self touch, even things like journaling and singing and humming, you can then start to show the brain, okay, this is the way we're going to treat our body now. This is how we're going to look at ourselves in the mirror now. And little by little, it really helps to repattern the brain, rewire the brain for whatever that intention was: self love, less shame, more worthiness. Um, and so that's kind of the way I see psychedelics working in this realm of mind body connection and how to intentionally access deep healing through the mushrooms.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. It's really creative and productive as well. Um, and I think it's also deeply emotional and spiritual process.
Yes.
Uh, so what exactly is the difference between using psychedelics recreationally versus as a true medicine?
Oh, that is such a good question.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the biggest difference is intentionality. I think that when you meet the mushrooms or whatever psychedelic you are choosing to use with the intention of asking these medicines to help you heal, because they aren't the magic pill, they're not going to do the work for you. They just open the door to this unconscious space within you so that you can start to do this work. I think
Mhm.
that's really the big difference between intentionally working with these medicines and using them recreationally. And I also really shift the language that I use when I describe these two different things because I think recreational use is a using of the medicine for maybe fun,
Yeah.
maybe disconnection, maybe a happy trip, maybe a cool music festival, and I don't think that that's necessarily bad. I actually think that you can intentionally use microdosing for fun or intentionally work with mushrooms on a higher dose for fun. But to me, the biggest shift is one, you enter into it with intention, and one, you don't. The other difference is that what I have noticed when you're entering into these relationships with mushrooms intentionally, either on a small dose or a big dose journey,
Mhm.
I've noticed that your preparation is stronger, your integration is stronger, and often you have a less challenging time with the
Mhm.
mushrooms versus folks who eat mushrooms, go to a music festival, have a bad trip, things are scary, they enter into spiritual, emergency or mental health challenges because of that experience because they didn't prep. They didn't know how to integrate and they weren't in the right mindset. So that's the big difference I see between the two. And I do actually think there's a place for fun and excitement and joy even in an intentional psychedelic practice.
Mm.
So I don't say fun is the difference, right? So I point that out to say that I don't think the fun aspect is the difference. I think the
Mhm.
difference between the 2 is the intentionality and you're coming to this as, asking for help, asking to be in relationship, asking to be, um, guided, and you're also willing to be in integrity with the medicine.
Mm. A more matured approach. More mature approach to this.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, okay. And Leslie, you have created a first of its kind
Mhm.
cycle informed when we talk about menstrual cycle microdosing protocol, which is the cyclical microdosing method. How does it work? Because I'm really curious to know about it. And what results have you seen in women using it?
Yeah. So the cyclical microdosing method is based around the different seasons of the menstrual cycle. And so within your menstrual cycle, you have 4 inner seasons: inner
Mhm.
spring, inner summer. Those are usually when your energy is high, you have fewer challenges, you are just after your bleed, and your estrogen is
Yep.
rising, and you're feeling pretty good.
Yep.
Then the second half of the cycle is your inner fall and your inner winter. Inner winter is when you have your period. And so those 2 phases, which are longer, are
Mm.
often also when we meet more challenges. And so what I looked at based on my training as a menstrual cycle educator and then my advanced training as a psychedelic integration guide was where we could potentially find more assistance from mushrooms within the cycle. And so in the first half, when you don't have a lot of symptoms, when your energy is high, you ingest your microdose twice a week. 2 times a week, you microdose. The rest of the days are for integration, they are for play, they are for doing whatever it is that you need to get done. And then in the second half, when we have more cyclical based challenges, you would microdose up to 5 times a week. And so 5 days of that week, you would eat your medicine and you would have more time for visioning journeys and meditations and walking in nature and journaling. And I have found that because of the different energy of those 2 phases of the cycle, the first seasons being very outward energy, very masculine yang energy, and the second half being very inward and yin, it really
Mhm.
does support that additional microdosing days in the second half. Because you're kind of naturally wanting to be more with yourself. You're naturally wanting to expand. Now, some
Mhm.
folks don't like to eat microdoses when they bleed. I personally really enjoy it. I think that it really expands my meditations and my visions and my ability to channel from the divine. But you certainly don't have to eat microdoses when you are bleeding.
Mhm.
That's always personal preference. But then you would follow that cyclical microdosing approach for about 3 months. those days, depending on how long your cycle is, you're really only eating mushrooms about 14 to 16 days of the month, not
Yeah.
every day, clearly. And what I've seen that change, and this is just wild, and it's not something that I can ever like guarantee or promise, but every single woman that I've worked with who has done this method has had reduced period cramps. They have had reduced mood swings. They have had reduced irritability, especially right before the period. And they have a much deeper connection to their intuition. So they leave, like, not feeling like they need to ask outside folks for validation when they wanna make a decision. They leave really understanding that their body is sacred and that this is something that is for them, not happening to them. And I think that's really one of the big things I hope to change in my life is this idea that the menstrual cycle isn't something that happens to you and you have to suffer through. It's actually a superpower if you learn how to align with it. And so the cyclical microdosing method really does enforce that belief in a lot of women that this is for them, this is part of their power, part of their divinity. And I really think that the mushrooms are just such a deeply feminine entity.
Yeah.
They're very connected to the womb. They're very, like, they grow in the darkness, just like we grow in the darkness. So I think that's why they lend themselves so beautifully to this practice.
Mhm. That's really symbolic. That's really symbolic. And um how different or how important is this for especially women in their midlife, because um I mean, although not just talking about all of the ages, but midlife is it's exciting as well as it's quite a tough one to navigate through. So, how different does it look like?
I have found, and I've worked with people from age 10 to 65, and the 10-year-old was not microdosing. Let me just point that out there. I worked with a 10-year-old for her menstrual cycle, and mostly my teenage clients come to me for menstrual cycle support. But what I've noticed is that there is a portal that happens in midlife where we transition from this archetype of the mother into an archetype of the wild woman. And so we're very ready to step into this next phase of our life, and yet society doesn't really do a good job of helping women become initiated into their rites of passage. And so I think that psilocybin and either on a small or a large dose is so potent for midlife women because they're often looking for the new purpose in life. They're looking for the next direction, this next step. Women live a really long time, and our society really only values you if you're young and beautiful or you're a mother. And there's this phase of life that you become kind of transparent and invisible. And
Yeah.
those are the women that I love working with. Um, that's why I really just have shifted to work with elder millennials and Gen X because and I will work with folks who are boomers too. But they are ready to do the work. They have lived a lot of life experience. Oftentimes they have had deep traumas that they have been
Very.
avoiding. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just they're so ready, and that's what I love, I find that, this medicine finds you when it is your time, and oftentimes it's between the ages of 40 and 55. That's kind of
Yeah.
my sweet spot, and I really just love working with those folks. As far as how it works with their cycle, there is an amazing study coming out of the UK that's happening right now by a company called Hystelica, a woman-owned research firm that they are looking into psychedelics for perimenopause and menopause, and I am just, like, waiting with bated breath to see what they discover because just from my clients that I have seen going through menopause, going through perimenopause, it just seems to help them have more self-trust, and I think that when our cycle becomes different and sometimes really tricky through the phase of perimenopause when things are, getting a little wonky. Um, Oftentimes we can, instead of coming into ourself, go to outside sources for help again. And I'm not knocking the medical community, but what I've
Mhm.
noticed is when women are ready and willing, this can bring them into a deep sense of self-knowing, a deep sense of self-trust, and a deep a deep sense of remembering wisdom that is ancient, wisdom that is ingrained in their cells. And I think that really does help carry them through a tricky phase of life. And I think that's why it's so great for midlife women.
Wow, that was really, really inspiring and empowering, honestly, and especially when you mentioned about that how society is, you know, kind only when either we are young or beautiful um, or just a mother. I think, it's a really, really powerful point. Really powerful point. So, of course, if our listeners would wish to connect with you, Leslie, and explore more about psychedelic medicine, somatic mindfulness, and of course about your cyclical microdosing method, how can they know that?
Well, I would love to just give you a link to add to show notes that they can sign up for the Cyclical Microdosing Method. It's a free week-long email course that will be sent straight to your inbox. It covers everything you need to know about microdosing. It includes journal prompts. It helps you intuitively learn to track your cycle, and it is jam-packed with somatic practices to help you integrate. It's probably one of my favorite freebies that I ever put together. All the videos are less than 20 minutes long, and so that's a really great place to start if you wanna dive that deeply in. If you don't really know if you want to dose with your cycle yet, I also have a free microdosing guide that is very, um, great for beginners. It's more general, and I can give you a link for that too. You can also find me on Instagram at Leslie Draffin. I have my own podcast called The Light Within, and I also have my website, lesliedraffin.com.
Great. Yeah, we'll have all the details mentioned in the show notes. And Leslie, thank you so much for this incredible conversation and
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
sharing your wisdom and your journey. And we'll have all the details in the show notes for our listeners. And I think you have really shown us how healing isn't just about fixing, but what's broken, but about reconnecting with our bodies, cycles, and inner wisdom. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, to all the listeners who are tuning in, if this conversation connected with you, especially with all the women out there, share it with someone who might need it. Because healing starts when we start listening to our bodies, our intuition, and the world around us. And refer to the show notes to reach out to Leslie and check out her resources and the wonderful gifts she's sharing. And until next time, stay present, stay open, and stay in harmony. Thank you.